Yet I conquer fear and fall like a sword. I run into the heat of day, like a knife I fight until the fight is won. In the rain I save each and every one till this war is won.
Huh. Didn't think we'd be seeing this again. Either Nintendo has some dirt on Capcom that they're using to exploit their best friend, developer Capcom, or Capcom legitimately thought that Umbrella Chronicles was a good idea. Umbrella Chronicles wasn't the absolute worst game in the series, we'll be getting to that one shortly, look forward to it, but it just wasn't adding to the value of the franchise at all. It just kinda sat there, mostly because it was just a glorified greatest hits record of Resident Evil 0 through 3, with nothing else to show for itself except for Vladimir Von's stereotype. One of my top 7 favorite characters in this franchise, who is just a cliched Russian military bad guy, so hard that it managed to come around to be hilarious because just like Albert Wesker, Ivan Generic the Fourth shtick works because Capcom wrote the character to take the stereotype seriously and managed to get a good voice actor to back that up. Apparently he died like a bitch in one of the missions I didn't play, so that was disappointing. But what's odd is that Capcom would invest in the same game idea twice when it wasn't doing all that much. Maybe the budget was so low for Umbrella Chronicles that it managed to produce a profit margin of 4 just by the brand name alone, and so Darkside Chronicles now exists and does the exact same thing, where it was launched on the Wii and then was later ported to the PS3 digitally because Capcom. And I think I'm going to pull this punch now because it's going to be the big takeaway from what I think about this game, what the opinion is. Surprisingly, Darkside managed to not only outdo Umbrella Chronicles with the whole greatest hits record thing, yet also launched so well that Darkside managed to do the utterly unthinkable. Darkside Chronicles managed to tell the stories of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil Code Veronica better than their original versions. And no, this isn't a joke or an attempt for me to be edgy for views. I was gobsmacked myself to be playing through the Code Veronica bits of Darkside and finding it to be a better tell of the tale than the original game I had played right before doing this series. It actually made writing the script for the original Code Veronica X video way harder than I thought because I was trying to judge Code Veronica X on its own merits and not on the merits of the filled-in blanks that Darkside Chronicles did. I suppose one of the biggest reasons why Darkside Chronicles feels like the HD version of Rezzy 2 and Veronica 10 years ahead of schedule was purely technological. Both games being redone for Darkside were released on the PSX, and while both games, especially Rezzy 2, were envelope pushers of the highest caliber in terms of what the console could do in order to tell a great survivalist story. Adding another decade of cinematic experience in video games helped immensely with the retelling. The biggest difference is simply additional context. Resident Evil 2 was a tighter, more coherent story told in Darkside, but Code Veronica definitely got the better end of the stick. One of the problems with the original game was the antagonists, Alfred and Alexia. The pair were not a part of the overall Umbrella organization, and what they could accomplish on their isolated island felt quite limited in comparison to the original trilogy. And while the pair tried to carry what was lost from that on their own backs by being really weird and aristocratically bonkers, they appeared so haphazardly in cutscenes and gameplay that Code Veronica's original game fell more on the survival plot, which in a Rezzy game is amazingly generic at this point with little to add beyond the great locales they were surviving in. But then you remember that it is fair critique, since Alfred was dressing up and acting so close to Alexia's actual personality in the first half that we could have been introduced to her via proxy. This was the one point that was majorly addressed in Darkside, where there were more appearances by Alfred and Alexia, making them feel like actual threats and consistent characters in the Darkside telling of the Veronica story. Beyond those two, the higher frequency of cutscenes and the better cinematography of the superior Wii graphics. Sorry, I just couldn't keep a straight face reading that. Meant that an already solid story was produced in a tighter, more coherent fashion, keeping the intrigue strong and keeping me hooked on what was going on in spite of already knowing what was happening because I was getting the blanks filled in, and finally appreciating what Code Veronica was going for back in the day. More examples include the change from Alfred being killed from getting shot 4 times and falling down a murder hole in the original, to possibly that happening, but also Alexia killing him through torture because of his incompetence. Also adds to the plot because it filled in a plot hole where you could have thought that Claire and Steve's breakout just happened to coincide with the 15-year deadline of Alexia and that being turned into Alfred releasing her early to help out with the invasion because he couldn't figure it out, and her not exactly being happy with that. And then, from that, she wasn't incubated long enough to actually handle the virus, leading to what happened at the end of the game. Another example is the death scene of Steve. Now, the Darkside version didn't totally redeem Steve as a character, because he's still written to be an obnoxious douche, but at least he's not being pervy, which is at least a step in the right direction. But the death scene of his is a lot better, since rather than the stupid runaway situation in the original, you have an action-filled stand-up fight with Mutant Steve that's suspenseful with good camera work, and Mutant Steve manages to save Claire right before being killed himself, adding to the end of his character arc, and some weight to his existence in the plot. I could go on and on with more examples, and trust me, there are definitely a few that are worth mentioning, but it's more or less the same story with HD Veronica. Cutscenes were added, script changes were made, more details were added, turning an already solid story into a fishhook intrigue with more robust characters and better resounding locations, I guess you could use as a word. Although the game did end with something that knocked me off my ass with laughter. In the original, Alexia is finally defeated with the plasma cannon, which just happens to be at the Reproduce Mansion for some reason. In Darkside, the plot is that the plasma cannon storage unit was linked up to some sort of DNA recognition machine that detected when Alexia mutated, and played a video from Alexander Ashford, her father, before he died, telling the people he assumed would be investigating the island and confronting Alexia right at this second that he predicted Alexia would have killed her entire family before she did that over her obsession with the Veronica virus. So instead of actually doing anything about it at the time, he left the plasma cannon right there for these hypothetical investigators so that they could help his daughter by killing her. Like, this shit is ridiculously movie grade even for Resident Evil. For Alexander, the idiot man of the plot, to just assume all of this crap was going to happen at the exact moment so the plasma cannon could actually be useful. What the hell was he thinking? Rezzy 2 doesn't get a lot of substantial improvements because The Solid was such an amazing classic at the time, but the script that was attempted was knitted together better, the vocal tonality was added to reflect emotions, and voice acting improved in general. The timing of cutscenes was better scripted to actually tell the story in a quicker pace so that you were getting through the intrigues faster and being more connected to the plot just because there was just so much crap being thrown at you all at the same time. I think the biggest major difference was that the change in gameplay style from survival horror to first-person shooter meant that cutscenes were happening more and faster throughout the game, so the story was unfolding a lot better as you were continuing along. Here is just a perfect example of an improvement to Rezzy 2. Brian Irons in the original game was the corrupt cop who let Umbrella dictate the scope of police work in his department. When Claire finds him in Scenario B, he's just sitting in his office with a corpse of a pretty lady on his desk that neither person even acknowledges. It's just there because, and then he gets killed by William Birkin in his back room. In Darkside, Brian Irons is found in his back room having the same corpse on his operating table, revealing to Claire that it was the mayor's daughter, I think? Maybe his own daughter, but I kind of doubt that. It was somebody important's daughter, and that he was planning to stuff the corpse to preserve the pretty lady forever, which adds tons to this one-off character about how creepy he was supposed to be originally, and how off his nut he is now even before he mutates into a G creature instead of just being murdered.
I bleed. That's not supposed to happen. Ow.
We need to stop this thing first!
I will add that not only do you get these HDified Rezzy games for playing with Darkside, but you also get the framing device plot, which is also really good. Leon and Krauser are tasked by some task force, possibly the CIA, to investigate a South or Central American village that has been dealing with a high-powered drug lord. Obviously, the zombie apocalypse has gone global, and the pair have to fight up to his mountain mansion to figure out what the hell was happening. After dodging all of the villagers' nonsense, they come upon the daughter of the drug lord who seems to have the power to tame BOWs through song. After they encounter the drug lord, they figure out that the drug lord has been purchasing BOWs on the cheap from Umbrella or a third party, and through that same supply chain, has also been experimenting with the Veronica virus that someone had duplicated and sold to him. Apparently, the drug lord injected the daughter with the virus that delivered her those awesome powers due to an incurable disease, which facilitated the kidnapping and butchering of all of the nearby young women for organ transplants to the daughter in order to complete the 15-year cycle and keep her virus stable and therefore her alive. And all of that turned out to be for naught, since in a last-ditch effort, he melded with a flower mutated with the Veronica virus to become a Cthulhu monster and died in 10 minutes of combat, leaving the daughter alone for another half hour, once Leon and Krauser figure out the escape helicopter business, and then she literally disintegrated from the effects of the Veronica virus. Oh, the Cthulhu monster also infected Krauser with the Veronica virus just in time for Rezzy 4. It's an odd plot, but actually one better than this game has any right to having, which is exactly this game in a nutshell. It is way too high quality for what it was trying to do. And just to round out this video in its entirety, we'll talk about the gameplay, which is also improved from Umbrella Chronicles, because mostly it tossed out the dumbass weapon upgrade thing from Umbrella, which ended up making upgrading any weapon in that game totally pointless by putting in more generic ammunition and having only 1 or 2 guns between each type, along with the player being able to get back ammunition between levels through upgrades. Plus, the upgrades are decently priced, so you don't have to end up 100%ing everything or grinding to get all the money to get good weapons out of the deal, and the upgrades actually do matter quite a bit, so you will be seeing the upgrades really easily through regular combat. Other than that, the actual shooting is exactly the same from Umbrella Chronicles, which means that yes, you do have to shake the Wiimote to reload, but the shooting is stable, the reticle is responsive, and Darkside does slow down the enemies considerably from the original game, which makes them easier targets, even when the hunters and the swarms get involved. The game also has amazing boss design and integrates a lot of great camera shots and movement between enemy and player all over the map to make fights that are quite suspenseful and fun to play against, while not giving the boss a lot of cheap shots or off-camera bullshit for you to deal with. Although I will say there were a couple bosses in the roster in my memory that were assholes due to limited attack windows and health increases, along with a few not well-explained mechanics that make the pacing crash to a freaking halt. But for the most part, the game is an amazingly solid on-rails shooter and stark improvement from the original game. If you're worried about game length, rather than Umbrella Chronicles shrunk down retellings, for which you'd get an entire Rezzy game in 3 short chapters, in Darkside you'll be getting Rezzy 2 and Veronica told to you again through 8 chapters, which facilitates the added detail and cinematography, so you get those better versions of the plots, while retaining the original elements that made those games so great, that Capcom put out this greatest hits version to capitalize on the success. Darkside Chronicles was almost the perfect sequel, since Umbrella Chronicles tried to be a game so lazily that it induced tons of reduced expectations, which paid off hugely for Darkside. It was such a 180-degree turn for this game to not only be better than its original, but also be one of the Rezzy spin-offs to keep around as one of the great ones of the franchise. The combat is better, the story is fantastic, and the creativity of the original content, with Leon and Krauser's one and only mission together, is way more quality than this game deserved. The attempt to literally rewrite and restructure the entire plot and progression of Rezzy 2 and Veronica could have backfired spectacularly because there are such huge fans of those games. But Capcom's third party set out to so intricately go through all the details and reproduce the settings and characters that they managed to put out the superior version. And just to put a pin in Darkside, even though this is on the Wii, the graphics of Darkside are actually quite good. Not Twilight Princess, but still some really solid stuff with the sweeping overviews and the inner bowels of the mansion's facilities, along with entirely reproducing the Umbrella City Police Department and Ashford Island. The monsters are also really well done with crisper, more disgusting character designs, and ones that differentiate enough to show off the differences between the monsters of the past and the evolved forms that the Drug Lord was purchasing, along with the great artwork for the bosses that take the iconic baddies like Mr. X and William Birkin and just take everything up a notch in quality and impactfulness. If you're a fan, then Darkside should definitely be in your library, because this was the spin-off that nobody believed in, that hit just as hard as any of the others, putting it in a place head and shoulders above the rank and file of Capcom's other attempts at a cinematic universe project. We'll end the video as usual with a final score, and sending you guys off with a final victory for gamers. Thanks for watching.